Hi, I'm Don.
And hi, I'm Cindy, and welcome to Pearls of Liberty this Sunday, May 22nd, 2001. This week we are kind of focusing to some extent on the possibility of the U.S. being restored and a little bit of how that might come to be and mostly why it's necessary. The first topic that we would like to touch on is the 60 Minutes piece that was done on the sovereign citizens movement, and they interviewed Mr. Alfred Adask, who was also a guest on the Alex Jones program, and Don has some things that he'd like to say about that.
We didn't, to make it clear, neither of us actually saw the 60 Minutes segment. We saw the after effects of it, and Alfred Adask was part of that. And basically what 60 Minutes was doing was bashing the sovereign citizen movement, and Alfred Adask and probably others don't particularly like that label. And what the media wants to do is demonize people with that label and say, oh, what are these people? Oh, in a nutshell, they say, these are people that believe that we should return to before the Civil War, when people were more free. And you are the one that makes the laws, not the government. Well, that of course is definitely a twisted viewpoint, and we want to make it clear that we basically do understand that pre-Civil War, the United States was very different from what it was after the Civil War, and the changes were covert, not overt. What happened, and I think we've mentioned this before, and it's covered in various authors, not in the mainstream of course, but what happened was, pre-Civil War, the states were sovereign, and within the states the individuals were sovereign to the point that they just delegated their sovereignty to the state. The federal government was a creation of the state, was not a lord over the state, and the states had the right to withdraw from the Union, which of course was changed by the very act that we had a Civil War that basically said, no, you can't secede from the Union. This is no longer voluntary, as it was when the Declaration and original Constitution were signed. So there was definitely a change after the Civil War in which the federal government expanded its power and began to dominate the states, and we're in a pretty late stage of that game, and more people are recognizing that. So we want to say that we agree with Alfred Adask that, and this is, I think, one of the most brilliant points that he makes, that the Constitution, the brilliance of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were that they were anti-government documents. The founders were people that believed that government should always be questioned, should always be restricted, and that the people needed to be the masters over their government, and that the government was their servant. They were not authorities. The government officials were not officials. They were public servants. You find that language change has really come about, that we no longer, the news media no longer talks about public servants. They talk about officials and authorities. And this is a change. This is a change for the worse. And you are not a subject. If your mindset is the original Constitution and the freedom of the United States, you are not a subject of a government. You are the sovereign, and the government is your servant. This is what made the United States such a radical engine of freedom and liberty until relatively recently. And we want to recognize that and say we need to get back to that. We need to have a peaceful second revolution that Thomas Jefferson said was probably necessary every 75 years or so. We're long overdue for such, and the key thing is awakening and awareness, and people like Alfred Adask and others are helping to increase that awareness, and we want to add our fuel to that fire as well.
The next topic is regarding Obama's interaction with the state of Israel and some of the things that are occurring there. And please comment. Carry that ball.
In Obama's speech this week, he said that Israel should go back to its 1967 borders, and there was a huge outcry, and there was a huge outcry from the supporters of Israel in the United States and around the world, and saying, my gosh, the president is siding with the terrorists, and this is a horrible thing. And then the Prime Minister Netanyahu made a statement saying, well, the United States should go back to its 1845, I believe it was, borders, in which Texas was a part of Mexico. So guess who? Does that look like a setup or what? I mean, this is just a power play or a mind game to get people thinking about, oh, maybe the United States has expanded its borders too much, just like Israel. Oh, maybe we should let Mexico come back in and conquer this land that, of course, their textbooks have been saying, and that they should do this, and they're in the process of doing this. So, but back to the Israel question, this is not an accident. This is not a slip-up. This is not something that runs counter to State Department policy or whatever. This is a massive setup. You have to understand problem, reaction, solution, and how, in terms of how the power brokers of the world set things up. See, what has been happening is that there has been growing worldwide awareness that a Palestinian state is necessary for the stabilization of the region, and there was a near universal UN declaration to that effect just recently. So what happens next? Well, we have to have that pressure expanded to the point where Israel can pose as being threatened. And of course, the support for Israel in the United States is huge, so there's a huge outcry when Obama makes this statement. What that does is justify in the eyes of the world any aggressive acts on Israel's part to stand for their own existence and keep them from being annihilated. Nothing like that is even remotely possible. So this is just mass manipulation. This is just a political theater. That's really all it is. So there really is no danger of loss of support for Israel in the United States. There is, sadly, a lack of recognition on that the part of Israel plays in feeding into the violence in the region. And we as Christians don't want to be supporting violence. We don't want to be blind supporters of an Israel who is not following the God of the Bible. That's true. They're not. They don't claim to be. There's a small religious minority that really doesn't have much political say in the government. They're basically a secular nation. And it's really not until Israel returns to following the God of the Bible that there be any opportunity for blessing. So as Christians, we don't want to bless what God isn't blessing. And I don't think there is any automatic blessing that comes with blessing people who are actually doing quite violent things to their neighbors, and not only out of retaliation. It's often framed that way for political purposes. There are great sites to go to understand more about this. One of my favorites is truthtellers.org and Ted Pike, and there really is serious things for Christians in America to look into, to think about. Are we really being told the truth, or is this all a massive setup? So we encourage you to think for yourself, look into these matters, and you're not going to find them in the mainstream media, so do a little digging. And don't pay too much attention to the political theater. The state of Israel is not in danger.
And as you said, Obama, as you characterize this as theater, and Obama is one of the players in the theater, of course, a major player. And recently there has just been a tremendous amount of focus on him regarding the questionable birth certificate that was presented. And Dr. Corsi was on the Alex Jones program this week, and he was discussing the birth certificate and detailing the flaws and the obvious flaws. And there are a few possible explanations of why something of this quality would be even put out there, and Don can elaborate on that.
Right. This is a really, really interesting dilemma. That Corsi's book was produced a while ago, but he just came out this week with a statement on the that he is close to having proof of not only that it is a forgery, which is pretty much a clear-cut issue for anybody that looks into it, but that he's on the trail of who the forger is. So what you have is that Corsi has done all this research and has uncovered the fact that, basically, in a nutshell, Obama isn't who he claims to be, and that he doesn't really even have the father that he claimed to have, and there was no marriage, etc., etc. So there's all that hidden stuff going on, but the key thing to note is that what Corsi's research did was to set up a situation in which Obama basically had to produce the birth certificate. So what happens? Now remember, all this stuff that you see on the news doesn't just happen spontaneously. Corsi says, and I agree, that Donald Trump was brought into this to provide political cover. He was called in to drum up the whole birth certificate issue because they had to produce it because of Corsi's book that was just waiting there to bring the issue of Obama's origins to the forefront. So Trump comes online, does this song and dance number, raises this issue, and then Obama produces the birth certificate, and Donald Trump says, "Oh, I'm satisfied." So what this huge figure Donald Trump, that people think is a brilliant businessman, says, "Well, I'm satisfied now. So everybody go back to sleep." That's the message to the masses that don't want to look into this thing. And actually, Dr. Corsi had originally bought into helping Donald Trump understand what was going on, but then realized later, after Trump became silent, when the birth certificate was produced, that Trump was really just being used, and probably with his own knowledge, that he was told, "We're going to produce the birth certificate, and then you shut up and say you're satisfied." So all that is meant to diffuse Corsi's work in doing this Obama expose, and to basically make sure that the American people don't dig beneath the surface. Because if you look just a little below the surface and know a tiny bit about how computer documents are produced, it's blatantly obvious that this recent certificate is a forgery. There's all kinds of evidence, and we're not going to go into it here, but if you want to, and I encourage you to, just research that online and become a little bit educated. So again, this is a massive wool being pulled over the eyes of Americans and the world, and as we mentioned last week, the people around the world see through this more than Americans. So it's so essential that you look into this. One of the massive attacks that was done against Corsi was that they were telling, there was an article in, what was it? No, it wasn't
Esquire.
It was Forbes? What?
Esquire.
Esquire. An article in Esquire that was saying that Corsi had, that Farah, Joseph Farah, editor of WorldNet Daily, was not standing behind the book, and that he was recalling it, and that was completely untrue. and is intended to cause a run on the bookstores where people would say, you've got to take, I want to return my copy, you've got to buy it back because of this statement. Well, the statement wasn't true. So you have potentially, very likely, a massive lawsuit that FARA is going to have to make against the Esquire magazine. This is all political manipulation. You can't take anything at face value that happens in this magnitude in politics today. You have to look into what's going on. So we encourage people to find out more about the man that claims to be eligible to be president, which I'm certain that he isn't. It is a massive deception. So look into these things.
And another possibility I see in all of this, in the poor quality of the birth certificate that was released, is that it was intended that the truth come out that not only is Obama not eligible to be president because he was not born a citizen of the U.S., but also the fact that he was probably born outside of wedlock. And we're not judging this. We're not moral police. But in most people's minds, still to this day, there is a stigma. And I believe all of this, as all this comes out about Obama, I believe it's possible that this is all meant to humiliate us as citizens of the United States and to cause us to come down significantly in our own view of ourselves. And Don will say something in a few minutes about the desperation that creates and the willingness to conform when somebody offers you a means to feel better about yourself. But I do want to mention another humiliation, that being a CIA list of various countries around the world, their gross national product, other various aspects of their economy, their wealth. And I believe you told me that China's #1 and the U.S. is dead last. And I'm not even certain this is, the CIA put this out. I'm not certain it's true. It might actually be true. Either way, again, the people of the United States are being humiliated, put down, lowered in our own view of ourselves. Unemployment, expensive gas, can't go have fun with your friends, can't afford to do anything. All of these things work on our minds, if we're not careful, to make us vulnerable to people who will use all these feelings to manipulate us. And can you talk a little bit about what we discussed?
Right. I think what you're remembering and where I want to go with this is how the people that do and have for decades, if not centuries and longer, manipulated world politics from behind the scenes, what they have often done is to use, again, problem, reaction, solution, and used humiliation and then to stoke a people's desire to rise above that humiliation and then swing the pendulum way the other way and then begin to overdominate. This is what happened to Germany. This is the creation of Nazi Germany. After World War I, Germany was seriously restricted to the point where they were seriously oppressed as a nation in terms of their trade and their ability to interact with the rest of the world as a punishment from World War II. And then what happened? They found their resolve, rose up as a strong nation, and then through covert means began to dominate others. The false flag burning of the Reichstag led to the invasion of Poland. So this is a tactic that the globalists use. I have no doubt that that's being used on America now to bring us down, to bring us to a point of humiliation that we're going to, in however long, and may take a decade or more, rise up and be strong again. The long-term plan is for the United States to be the military force that does enforce the New World Order. We're believing that that's not going to happen, that the United States won't be able to be used in this way because we have too many people that still understand and believe in freedom. The creation of the terrorist boogeyman is, of course, a huge part of that false belief that they want America to buy into. But this other aspect to that of the humiliation and then the rising up is another thing that happens. This is an echo of what happened with Vietnam. That was, we were purposely defeated so that there would be this resolve that would be necessary to build a strong enough military, which we do have now. That was a backlash of what happened in Vietnam. This is a long-term strategy thing, and I have no doubt that this was brought about through behind-the-scenes manipulation by the global controllers.
So we have these various means by which we're being humiliated. The issue of the Mexican border, the issue of, which we haven't even discussed and won't in any depth this morning, but I'll just mention the TSA and patting us down and the implementation of what feels like a police state is personally humiliating to us. The very fact that we're under suspicion of doing something wrong, contrary to our legal system, which says we're innocent until proven guilty. We have the Obama birth certificate humiliation. We have our fall, the fall of the dollar, that humiliation. However, I see a possible glimmer in that aspect of the humiliation, in that as goods from other countries become more expensive due to the fall of value of the dollar, it will become more reasonable for us to buy American, which we're guilty of not buying American. We've always looked for the deal. However, we realize at this point that buying American can really materially help this country recover. And I can remember when I was a little girl, my parents bought a new car every 5 years. To them, that was patriotism. They did not have a lot of extra money, but they felt that by buying a new car every 5 years, of course it was a Detroit automobile, that they were helping our country. And if we can get in that mindset, especially now with the dollar falling in value, as you go out shopping, as I noticed yesterday, just even some things at Costco, that the American-made products that I tend to think of as higher quality, higher cost, were actually priced lower than some things made poorly in some other countries. So this might be an opportunity for us to recover to some extent.
Right, I think so. I think that we can begin to rebuild. I think the stage is already being set, even though we haven't been completely brought down to the bottom. There is a beginning of a rebuilding going on. What we have to be careful of is to not ever get comfortable in a police state. We always need to be thinking freedom. And I'm actually not a fully open borders person, because I recognize that when the money system is rigged, then open borders can be used to, as the money system is rigged now, then the money system can be used for economic warfare against a nation. So a nation needs to be able to defend itself against economic warfare, and we do need to create an environment in which jobs for creating goods and services, but even more goods, are again a big part of what the United States is about.
And as Don stated regarding the purposeful manipulation of people to feel badly about themselves, as in Nazi Germany, with with the plan behind that to turn those negative feelings into a direction that will serve long-term plans of the elite. Don also mentioned to me this week, well, he actually read me a quote. This is taken from a statement that General Cornwallis made to General George Washington. And more than 200 years ago, our demise as a nation was already planned. And permit me to read this. General Cornwallis said, quote, "A holy war will now begin on America, and when it is ended, America will be supposedly the citadel of freedom. But her millions will unknowingly be loyal subjects to the crown." Cornwallis went on to explain what would seem a contradiction. Quote, "Your churches will be used to teach the Jews' religion, and in less than 200 years, the whole nation will be working for divine world government. That government that they believe to be divine will be the British Empire. All religions will be permeated with Judaism without even being noticed by the masses, and they will all be under the invisible, all-seeing eye of the grand architect of Freemasonry." End quote. And indeed, George Washington himself was a Mason, and he gave back through a false religion what he had won with his army. Quote, "Cornwallis well knew that his military defeat was only the beginning of world catastrophe that would be universal, and that unrest would continue until mind control could be accomplished through a false religion. What he predicted has come to pass. A brief sketch of American religious history, and we have seen Masonry infused into every church in America with their veiled phallic religion. Darby and the Plymouth Brethren brought a Jewish Christianity to America. Masons Rutherford and Russell started Jehovah's Witnesses Judaism, which is now worldwide with their message of the divine kingdom. Mason Joseph Smith started Mormon Judaism with its Jewish teaching of millennialism." And I would also add, just because yesterday was May 21st and the rapture didn't come, Christians have been programmed, mind-controlled. This isn't a joke. This isn't some wish that Cornwallis had. This has been accomplished. And proof is that, although we joked about it, it was very public, broadly discussed news that someone thought that Jesus was going to return yesterday. The very idea, now I will qualify this a little. I do believe Jesus himself said that he would return at some point. However, living for that return is very similar to the Jews' messianic outlook that they're waiting for the Messiah. We're not waiting for the Messiah. He has come. He has accomplished what the Father sent him here to accomplish. If we live for some future moment, we won't be focused on today. We won't be focused on our families, our children, our work, our callings, our expressing our giftings, expressing the glory of God in the way that God intends for us to. So, live for today, please.
Jesus said, "Occupy until I come." We believe that he will come again. We don't believe that he'll come again secretly and that people will be raptured away. The rapture and the second coming are one and the same thing, that those are living that are living when he comes will be caught up to meet him in the air. Yes, that's scriptural. We believe in that. But that has never been intended to be about escapism. When Christians talk about the blessed hope, yeah, the blessed hope is Christ coming again, but he's coming for a bride who has made herself ready. That's the church. That's an overcoming bride. And I don't see that overcoming as being some kind of a political domination thing that we as Christians, institute some kind of government that says you have to obey all of God's laws. Far from it. The God that we believe in and serve is a God of freedom, and he will not have a type of government that takes away people's free will. God always wants people to have their free will, but to have the wisdom to choose what's good for them. And that comes about when you put liberty first. If you put a political agenda cloaked in righteousness first, then what you end up with is a anti-freedom police state and something that is not pleasing to God. So we encourage Christians to investigate the roots of liberty in America, especially understand the principles of freedom that the founders believed and which enabled Christianity to flourish. Again, I want to agree with Cindy about the inroads that were made in deception by Darby and the Plymouth Brethren. I've, like I said last week, known about this for about 30 years now, that this is false teaching. This is end times deception. This is escapist mentality that prevents the work of God from going forward on this earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We want to be living that. We want to be bringing about the kingdom. We don't want to be saying we can't do it, it's got to get really, really bad, the Antichrist has to come, and oh, that's a good thing because that means Christ is coming sooner. I'm sorry, that's perverted thinking. That's the opposite of the way the Lord would have his people function on the earth. We need to be agents of truth and life and light, and never to be rejoicing that darkness is increasing. It's our job to increase the light. We know there will be a struggle, and we know that we'll be called upon to stand strong in the midst of that struggle. So don't get an escapist mentality and think that it's not going to happen because there's an escape clause called the rapture. That's deception.
Absolutely. So in the course of U.S. restoration, which we hope for, if we're not present in the moment, if we're not tuned in to what's happening around us, we won't be effective. If our focus is somewhere else, we just won't be effective. We want to mention just a little bit about a great friend of a great friend, Ian Garland, who is, we mentioned a couple weeks ago, still in jail, being held without bail until October. He was a weapons dealer, strictly above board, did everything by the book, double checked with ATF before he sold to the people. It almost feels like he was framed because that's why he was arrested. He sold to some people that he specifically asked the ATF to okay, and they specifically okayed. And we just basically want to say his name and let everybody know that we are very much in favor of Second Amendment rights, and we just send out prayers to Ian in Jesus' name, and the Lord will sustain him as he's in jail and bless him and bring about his speedy release and justice.
Support Ian Garland. Free Ian Garland.
Yeah, that's right. Dr. Noah was not able to be with us for a health update this week because he had a very special family event. His daughter was graduating from college. But Don has a bit that he would like to say regarding some of the dangers regarding Fukushima.
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize how important it is that we do take care of ourselves from a health standpoint as people that are wanting to make a difference in the world, wanting to increase life and liberty. So important. There is a war on your body, and you need to be active in your education about that. The danger has not died down, but we want to mention it to make sure that people stay aware of the radioactive fallout that's happened in Fukushima. The meltdown is occurring. There's a possibility, very likely, that it will get into the groundwater in Japan. There, of course, has been the release of a massive amount of radiation into the ocean, and one of the news articles I saw this week was that there was actually some Japanese officials in their government that said that the U.S. had encouraged them to dump the radioactive fallout into the ocean. So some very strange stuff there, but something clicked for me, and I'll just throw this out there. It's not proven by any means, but it's just a thought that to me kind of rings true about why they would be allowing this, why the powers that be would want to damage the Earth to the degree that it's being damaged almost purposefully. And beyond the fact that there's some pretty strong evidence that Fukushima was made worse, if not outright caused by some activities that had to do with things like HAARP or underground explosions, the mismanagement of it has been horrendous. It's far worse than Chernobyl. That's well proven now. And we'll see that radioactivity encircling the world repeatedly and not getting any worse. And then in the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, going into the food chain, etc., etc. So we have massive radiation contamination of the United States, and we have continued planning of more more nuclear power generations to be built, which of course would have similar dangers, and they almost always seem to be near where the fault lines are. Maybe just because that's where the oceans are and they need it for cooling, or there may be more to it than that. But the realization that I had was that all the futurists, that the globalists and people that have talked about the future have talked about dome cities. They have long planned dome cities that are smaller than the ones that exist now, but with domes around them. And it occurred to me that would be because the Earth was purposely polluted, so they had to put people in the domes cities for their protection. So I just had that now it makes sense thought that I wanted to pass out there, because with Agenda 21 coming, there is this political movement to begin to herd people in cities, and then if the doming of a city becomes possible, then the controllers can say, see, we've made it safe for you, we've provided a safe place, and that's a good thing. Of course, it's loss of freedom, it's control, it's fascist, it's everything horrible, but they need a way to get us into that, and they may be purposely creating this horrendous level of pollution in order to get there. I think that's a strong possibility.
I don't think that I mentioned to you that Knut told me that Brown's gas can consume nuclear waste.
Whoa!
Without any negative effects, any harmful byproducts.
That is absolutely huge, because I have always said about nuclear power, nuclear energy in general, that I just don't like it until they can figure out a way to make nuclear waste non-nuclear, to stop the nuclear reaction. If in fact
Sure.
Brown's gas can do that, that is monumentally huge.
Well, that's what Knut said.
That's incredible.
And he has a DVD from years ago that we're going to be processing and, with his help, re-releasing. So that'll be coming.
Awesome.
In keeping with our theme to some extent of restoring the U.S. and seeing the great possibilities that are still open in this country, in our Pearl Culture segment, the first movie that we'll mention, and I know I'm going out of order here, but last evening we watched the film Bottle Shock. and I found it so encouraging. It was. I'm not sure if the motion picture industry has changed significantly, or if it's just our matrix, what we get on what comes up on Netflix Watch instantly for viewing. But it seems like recently so many of the films that we've seen have been dark and sad and ruined people. Bottle Shock was about redemption and hope and wine. A recent film, but it doesn't have the feel of the darkness of many of the films that are coming forth at this time. So would you like to explain a little bit of the story and why it gives so much hope?
Sure. It's actually, of course, not taking place in the present day, but it's taking place in the mid-1970s, and it's about in 1976. I didn't realize the full historical context until watching the movie, but you may be aware, if you read the news at all in terms of wines, that there was a French versus American wine competition with blind tasting held in France. The first one was done on America's bicentennial, and then it was repeated again, I think 30 years later. And in both cases, the American wines won. And this movie is the story about that event that happened in 1976. And it was amazing to me to see the pioneer spirit in Napa Valley, which of course now is just hugely commercial and very controlled. It was like watching something out of the Wild West, the way that these guys were producing wine, and it was just so refreshing. And I made the comment to Cinnamon when we were watching it, it seems like when something is breaking out, that's where it's exciting to be. That's where life really is. And once you're out of that phase, then something goes out of it. There's a control thing that comes in, and it's no longer this incredible adventure. So this movie captures that incredible adventure, some stupid moves that were made to try to survive, but you have a real fight for freedom in terms of surviving and actually triumphing. And this captures something that we badly need in America again, to have that belief in entrepreneurship, that we can do it, that it doesn't matter what the restrictions are, that we can find a way. And of course, a lot of that will only come back by being able to push back government. That's a given. So we need people to push back government, but we also need people to rise up in an entrepreneurial fashion. And with that in mind, I'm also going to go back to Steve Pachesnik, who was again on Alex Jones just a little bit this week, because he kind of encapsulates that for me, not only from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but also from a military standpoint, where he's kind of old school. He may not see the full conspiratorial view that we see. We see a long-term plan here, but what's happening, I believe, is that entrepreneurs are beginning to see that this is a growing police state that we're in, and they're beginning to push back. They're beginning to fight back. And the more that happens, the better. We don't need everybody to see the A to Z conspiracy that I could prove is there, but if people just rise up and cry out for freedom and to be able to do what we've always said America is about, which is the entrepreneurial spirit, the not having to be born into something, not having your hands tied with red tape by the government, then that will begin to set us free again. And this movie, Bottle Shock, is about that. I think it gives us a taste for what we need to recapture. And it wasn't that long ago, so it's very encouraging that way.
Absolutely. And if you have the opportunity, I can't imagine anyone not enjoying this film. And just the pure beauty of it being filmed in the Napa Valley is magnificent. Another film this week that does offer some hope is Chain Reaction, and Don didn't have the opportunity to see that. I watched it because it is regarding the development of Brown's gas as a fuel, getting hydrogen from water, which is limitless energy. And a friend of ours who we've had the privilege to meet was actually represented in that film as one of the characters, which is why I found the film personally interesting and why I watched it. I'm not sure how close to the actual facts the film is. I have a feeling it's not terribly close, but there certainly has been a serious battle to bring Brown's gas to the forefront, and people have died to stifle it. It has been put to use in many other countries at this point. This film, the story took place, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago. But since then, Brown's gas is in use in many other countries, but has never been fully used in the United States as it might be. And it opens up possibilities for things like very small, easy to manage steel mills, and practically limitless. And we will be bringing you more information as a little bit of time goes by on Brown's gas. But Chain Reaction is kind of a good introduction to the idea that something like that is out there, because it is. Another film that we saw this week, much more somber, was Return to Paradise. And it's a very good film. In fact, it was an excellent film. It has an unusual subject matter. We won't divulge the plot, but a lot of the subject matter has to do with drugs and international drug laws and the manipulation of international drug laws. And I know Don has some things that he'd like to say about that.
Well, the main thing is, of course, that this takes place in Malaysia, and there's a huge police state in Malaysia that revolves around drugs. And as we've mentioned before, which is common knowledge to libertarians, but conservatives and other people may not be as aware, that the real reason for drug laws is it gives the government a monopoly on the drug trade and artificially keeps the prices high. And if it were true that in the third world that you had real freedom, you wouldn't have that situation. You wouldn't have police states. What funds the police state? I'm convinced that that's actually the global mafia, world banking cartel that props up the police state, because that gives them the source of their drug money, which they use to fund a lot of covert operations. So you have this picture of this police state in Malaysia. You have, in the movie opens with three friends getting high and just enjoying the natural beauty, and the police are after them, and one of them is captured and the other two get away. Years later, they learn that their friend is in prison and go through analysis of their digging deep to find out if they should go back to try to help their friend. And like Cindy said, we won't give it away, but it is a great film on a few different levels, that the struggles they go through internally to decide whether they should just go on with their lives or whether they're called to go back there, and then what actually happens to the one who was caught. So, and that character is played by Joaquin Phoenix, who does great in that role, and a couple of other actors do really good jobs as well.
Vince Vaughn.
And who you may know from The Wedding Crashers, and very good.
Anne Heche.
And Anne Heche, however you say her name, is also has an important role in that film. But it's a good film to give you a picture of a third world police state, which unfortunately is not that different from what is actually happening in America in the drug war once you look behind the scenes. There was something else that I came across this week that just reiterated that the modern foundation of the police state comes from the war against drugs. That is what has been used to build the modern police state. And if you don't know it, America has the largest per capita prison population in the world, larger than China, larger than anyone. And what is it? It's drug offenders. And why is that a bad thing? Because the reason why they can get cheap labor for the corporate machine is to use the prison population. So the people are needed to feed into this system, and they use the drugs to get them. Meanwhile, the top drug lords, the sources, are never captured because that's actually the covert government that's running that operation. They just use it to create the source of their slave labor. It's horrible, and you can sometimes see it more easily if it's in another setting, and that's what this film is useful for. So we did enjoy it and encourage you to watch Return to Paradise.
And 50% of the people who are imprisoned in the world are imprisoned in the United States. That's half of the world's prison population is in the United States. That's pretty staggering statistic. Do you have any additional thoughts or sentiments for the week?
Live free or die. There is no escape.